Welcome to Lore Citizen, a podcast dedicated to all things Star Citizen lore. If you enjoy this, make sure that you like, subscribe, and follow all of our social medias. Without further ado, let's get started. Hello and welcome to another Lore Citizen podcast with just two in a row. I'm gonna do my best to either get Jale and Al on as frequently as possible. If not, then we'll find some guest speakers to come on and talk about Star Citizen lore and people who are fascinated about stuff, because we've got ourselves a burgeoning little lore community that's starting to show up. I have ultimate power. I have unlimited power, and have restarted the lore Reddit that existed since 2015 was abandoned, so I just claimed it as my own because I have a flag. And that's how this works. You don't have a flag, so I do, and that's I control it now. Mm-hmm. So with that, come join us at r/Star Citizen lore if you want to kind of join in the discussions. We'll do some cool stuff in the future, and this will probably end up there too, because that works as well. But let's move on to introduce our two hosts for today. Let's start with the man who was missing, the sanity in our last discussion, because our last discussion was 2 hours long and it was off the rails. So, Jale, who are you? Yeah. What are you doing, Star Citizen? Where can they find you?
Execute struggled to try and keep it on track as well. So,
hello, I am Jale. You can usually find me on Twitter and here. I have a YouTube channel as well. And yeah, I'm mostly known for doing a lot of stuff with Xi'an language. And at the moment, I'm just dealing with a bout of COVID and looking forward to CitizenCon.
I also recently got over the Rona, and I found that it was bad, but it was mostly just annoying because it's just like, are you in the same boat?
I'm having a pretty light time with it. It's actually more relaxing than my current job is with coronavirus, and I end up feeling worse at the end of the day, having put in my solid hard work on that than I have from just sitting back and watching. I watched all of the Hobbit movies with my wife. I haven't seen. Yeah, I'm on like full green bars now, so I think it's just that
it was you. Yeah,
Discord doesn't like Australia or something, and it had pegged our call in Australia.
Yeah, well,
that's just tech. I know it's tech companies neglecting our brethren down under.
It's those people who just don't like old man Al Hurston, I tell you.
It's the cat girl revolutionaries are coming.
That's right. The workers, the United Workers Union.
Yeah,
causing all manner of strife.
Sorry about that. You'll probably hear old man Al cut in and Jale explain, but we'll probably edit that portion out. We're having some technical issues. All right, and just joining us as usual, we have Mr. Al Garrett. Who are you? What do you do in Star Citizen? Where can they find you?
Al Garrett. I'm probably becoming more well known as old man Al Hurston these days, I think. I'm one of the info runners.
You'll still be Crazy Al in my heart.
Yeah. I'm also known as Crazy Al because, what else do you call people who spend lots of money on ships? Or lose a javelin. It's probably that. Yeah. So I'm one of the info runners. We do fix my fleet. That's probably what we're best known for, and trying to help people find the best bang for their buck. Picking up the things that we've learned down the track as we've been going and buying ships and upgrading ships and all the rest of it. So that's probably the key thing we do. But we also speculate on what's coming, what we think the ships will be good for, how the game's going to develop, how the game is developing, what gameplay is good, what gameplay we don't think is good. All of that stuff. I also do the law stuff with Paul and Jale, as you guys know. And occasionally I stream as Old Man Al or as a Justatoon or Justatoon.
Nice. And speaking of old man Al, there is currently an art print available in the merch store down below. I gotta start plugging the merch more because that's what everyone does. But go down there, click the little icon. All of the money that's going to be gained from those art prints will be given to charity. The choice that I was talking about was the Smith family charity, possibly, but then Al had some other ideas, so it may be multiple charities just to divvy it up a bunch of different ones. So. But Australian-based charities for that. And then I'm going to eventually convince Jale to let me use his visage to create another art print.
You can use my visage for anything you like.
There we go.
So is Jale our Xi'an ambassador, or is he the Erasmus Professor of Languages at
Rudder?
Whichever university he so chooses to represent?
There's a character who is sort of a cultural translator. He basically has Britton Watkins, who made the languages, his real job in Star Citizen, and she sits there translating all these. The Xi'an ambassador is sort of slinging off insults and horrible phrases, and she's going, "Oh, the ambassador would like you to know that they are very grateful for the opportunity." That would be my job. That would be me.
Working with the diplomatic corps. Jale works for the UE diplomatic corps. Is what he's trying to say.
No, I'm in private sector. Now.
Private sector now.
Private
Yes.
sector. So he can actually record all the insults and release them later as this is what they really said.
All right, and then eventually we'll do a visual one of me from from a really bad, poor academic faculty photo from like Rudder University or something like that. From
there's either that or the Judge Dredd image of Paul. I am the law.
I am the law. I do have ultimate power now because I am the only moderator on the subreddit.
And what have Execute and I have been saying to you for years now, you know?
I think you should be like the guy who's running for the union office or something, you know, like was it Intergalactic Workers of the World or whatever?
Yes, it's actually United Workers Union is what it's called. It's the UWU. It's literally UWU. Yeah. So
named by old man Hurston, I think.
Well, I think it's United Workers is the name of the like it's the version of that, which is like so that's me. This is working for the right companies. All right. Ooh.
You just represent ooh.
So with that all being said, let's talk about the topic for today, alien races. Now, these are not meant to be comprehensive discussions on alien races. There is far too much information about all the different alien civilizations. And when we say alien races, it gets even more complicated because there are technically alien races that live in human space, like the Kazi Grazer or the blind Oni crab or the Stormwall. These are all technically alien races that live in UEE space. They're just not civilizations. So we're talking about alien civilizations because whenever I bring up alien races or I say something like that, someone goes, "Well, Paul, technically." It's like, yes, I know. You know what I meant. You know what I meant. Alien civilizations.
And we're also ignoring the Vanduul.
Yes.
And we're not even going to talk about the Krafak. So,
yeah. Well,
unless they relate to one of the other releases. But
if they want to know the Vanduul, we did 2 episodes on the Vanduul Wars, which pretty much gives them everything we know about the Vanduul.
See, now, if you were doing this in Xi'an language, this would be a lot easier because they have different words for aliens and intelligent aliens. So, if only we could be doing, if only we could be doing this in like a better language.
In a better language, yes.
Yeah.
The problem there is we'd be talking about humans and they'd be using the unintelligent
aliens. I would say, how many times has that been slipped into a Xi'an phrase of basically calling humans animals?
I think the real problem with trying to do it in the Xi'an language is you can only speak to other people who know the Xi'an language.
Yeah, that's fine.
No shade.
There's like 2 people. There's like 2 people in the universe who would listen to it, which is fine.
It's the only problem with using constructed languages.
I get the idea that the Xi'an with their long life treat humanity like a petulant child, like you do a petulant child. They're kind of, yes, they're infants. They're just little children. They have no idea what they're doing. We'll just
you're jumping You're jumping ahead. Let's get started with this.
Sorry.
Yeah, let's start with, we're gonna do this in the order of contacted. So I'm doing the Banu, and I'll get started with the Banu, which is, I'm going to start with the quote from the person who found the Banu, or just first encountered the Banu, which is Vernon Tarr, who said, "A lot can change in a single jump." So we've already talked about the discovery of the the Banu with by Vernon Tarr, and we know that Vernon Tarr nearly started an interstellar conflict by shooting at the first Banu ship, but it was all smoothed out over time. So the official first contact day is June 12th, which was in 2438, which is when the Banu and humans first encountered each other under the UNE. The Banu as a species, there is still some question as to their origin. The problem is, and I'll just start this off right now, the Banu have no history. They do not believe in preserving records at all. So we don't know a lot about the Banu because the Banu don't know a lot about Banu. Probably humanity knows more about Banu history than the Banu do, because humans are the ones who care to preserve their history. Though they're the oldest race that we've had contact with, in the sense that we've known them the longest, over 500 years now, 514 years to be specifically. And because they don't preserve history, what we do know is based off of what records they do keep for like immediate purposes. Though they might discover something, if it has use for it, if it has value for it, they'll adapt it into their culture. And this may have a lot to do with the fact that the Banu themselves do not live very long. Their average lifespan is about 30-something years. They're actually shorter lived than humanity. And as a result, they tend to be more motivated by work. The Banu, the basic unit of a Banu culture is called the Suli. A Suli is everything. It's literally their entire culture. At the very core, a Suli is two Banu getting together and working. That's a Suli. A family would be a Suli. A giant mega corporation would be a Suli. A government would be a Suli. Sulis is just how they function in terms of their societies. And to kind of describe how deep the Suli goes, a Suli starts with, a Banu's life starts with the Suli, a childbearing Suli. It may be a corporation, it may be just two people. They get together, they have children. That child will then go to a rearing Suli, will then go to a education Suli, which will then go to whatever they're good at. They work in that job until they've paid off the debt of raising them. And then once they've paid off the debt, they can leave the Suli and join their own Sulis, form their own Sulis, doesn't matter. So from the very beginning, this organization is permeation. And it's much more like a family than it is a corporation, but it's also a corporation. It's also important to note that the Banu do not have a concept of gender. They understand that gender exists, but there is no gender in Banu society. And they may even be asexual in the sense that they don't have physical genders. Two Banu can mate, but they choose who gets to.
Yeah. They are kind of, typically they're in a what we would consider a male state, and then they can elect to undergo a biological change which makes them ready to bear children. So they are essentially a monosexual species, and as a result have no gender as well.
Yeah. And their language has no gender as well, as I understand.
And most Banu through their life, if they are of a persuasion to have children, will sire children and will bear children, and they'll just kind of like try both sides of that.
Yeah. And it's important to note that like the Banu are focused on making the most of what they have. So most Banu, because they live so short, by the time they're in their 20s or 30s, they've left their home rearing, they've paid off all their debts, and they've moved on to greener pastures. If they're lucky, they might be able to do it faster if they get, say, find a big strike or something like that. So these Sulis permeate everything, and as a result, they don't really have a government. There's not really a central government that controls all of the Banu. They have what's called the Banu Protectorate, which is kind of like a UN sort of thing. It's like an EU sort of thing. It's just a big conglomeration of different Sulis who get together and talk and decide how to deal with outsiders. Because they recognize that there is an outside states, the Xi'an, the Vandul, the UEE. They recognize these things are entities, but they don't necessarily deal with entities. When they want to deal with outside entities, they know they have to do it as one rather than as individual Sulis. So that part is a little still kind of wiggly. They're still kind of talking about a lot of those details and how that works. But we do know that there's theoretically come from a homeworld called Bacchus 2. This is not known if it is actually their homeworld, but they do have a group called the Gatherings, which is specifically around a religious group known as the Council. The Council is responsible for social and moral dictums that define and direct Banu society. They are a group of, if I'm correct, and this was one that hard to find because this is an old lore, I think, so this may have changed. A group of monks, effectively religious monks, that live separate from Banu society, that make these dictates, these religious dictates, which kind of set down the closest that the Banu have to like laws, universal laws in their culture. And they have two deities, so they have a religion. They have Kasa, the patron of luck, and Tanonim, the great traveler. My Banu is terrible, so I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. But they are, they're both the main patrons, and even humans respect those patrons as well. There was a recent booty call where Jester, the literal pirate in Pirate Radio, was complaining that people were not attacking Banu ships because they thought they would make the gods angry, the Banu gods angry. So,
in fairness, that was just a complaint about the stupidity of pirates.
Yes,
and their stupid approaches to luck.
Yeah.
And well, the
stupid
Banu
decisions.
The Banu are also like that. Those people who go, "Oh, that sounds like an interesting god. I'll take that one." So I think if you go on a Banu ship, you're likely to find maybe like a little shrine to St. Christopher, because they will have found Catholicism and gone, "Oh, St. Christopher, that's your like your traveler one. So that's like our Kasa. We're going to take that. Thanks. That's
we'll take that. We'll add that. We'll appropriate it, and yeah.
I'm thinking of the scene from The Mummy where the guy's like pulling out like every single like religious symbol. He's just trying to save himself. That is pretty Banu, as that whole thing.
Yeah,
just like I'm just going to keep pulling things out.
I could also see the Banu having the lamp, because the lamp is
the lamp
take on significance. But they'll have it. They'll have the lamp because it's the light, so it's the way it links the way to the.
That is an old cut. That is a deep cut for the lamp, the religious group, the lamp. So that is effectively the Banu in more or less terms. They do have criminality. They do have military-ish, but these are mostly just Banu protectorate or Banu Sulis working together for a common cause, often with exchanges. I will say the last thing that's really important to note is that they are very, very dedicated to perfection, to the craft, being really good at something, which is one of the reasons why they have this unique look at sports. It's unknown if they actually had sports before in contact with humans, but since they've contacted humans, they've learned about Sadabal, and they are fascinated by Sadabal. To the point where Banu, it's an official Banu sport. They love to watch it, and I don't know if they play it. I think they have a couple of stadiums in their own space. but they literally to the point where professional saddleball stadiums will have the fans for one side on one like part of the stadium, fans for the other side in the other stadium, and specific Banu stands, because the Banu will just cheer for both teams. No matter what happens, they're just cheering all the time because they love to see professionals leave it out on the line, doing really, really good. It's for them, it's for the love of the sport, not necessarily for the teams, which is kind of makes them unique. And that's the Banu.
My question on Banu and their love of sport is their love for both teams still going to be there if they invest in making money on the one team, or would they invest equally in the teams?
Well, that's a good question. I guess
if Fasula put a team together.
Yeah, I guess if you're betting on one team or the other, maybe you'd have more vested interest. I'd love to see what the Banu would do with a classic British football 0-0 draw. Who are they going to be cheering for then?
Right.
Cheering for like the linesman calling out, yeah, oh, that was a great call on that offside.
I actually forgot about this as well. They apparently can withstand very high temperatures and very low temperatures.
And can eat anything.
They can eat anything. They're quite happy in like most atmospheres, but they have a very strong sense of smell. And there's even a chapter in their like little language guide that's just entitled "You Smell," which I always thought was just a passive aggressive dig by the lore team at after a citizen con or something.
Yeah, you all smell. And they also sleep very little. They only sleep about 90 minutes, so they don't
catnappers.
Yeah.
But then, considering their lifespan is so short.
Yeah,
it's about 50 years their lifespan, and you can get old ones, but the bell curve is around 50.
Around 50,
and you sort of retire at like traditional retirement age is equivalent to 48 in our years. But this is something that you didn't mention that I think is really interesting about them. They don't. It's tied with that thing of them not keeping records. They don't use absolute time. They have no concept of 23:37 British time. It's always, I'm going to meet you 10 hours from now. And everything is, even like multi-year things will be done based on 5-second increments that they call beats that are from now. So this contract will last, 1 million beats or whatever.
Yeah.
And even their even the luminaria, the lamp or the clock or whatever they use for the luminaria, I think it's the candle or whatever, lasts for so many beats.
Yeah.
And then that's the period of that festival. It's that many beats, and then it goes on.
And it's metric. It's metric time, which is lovely.
So it's communist time. It's not freedom time. Thank you for letting me know.
No, it is freedom time. I'm pretty certain that Jale and I will argue that point.
My fellow Americans, that's time for you. I will also add that their personality, the Banu, and if you read the Banu, they come across as they've got big. What is the term that my wife uses all the time? Gosh, it's a breed of dog that's constantly not Doberman. They're like pups. They're like puppies. They're like dogs. They're like constantly happy to see you. They're just down for whatever. They kind of just like, yeah, let's just do this. Let's do this. This is fun. This is interesting. Even when they're like enslaving you or bringing you into servitude, they'll be like, this is gonna be fun. Come join us. Because it's for them, it's like it is life. They don't really have this concept. And that's the other thing that I forgot to mention because it's very controversial. And I wanted to make sure we see it a little bit further down the line. They do have a type of slavery, but for the Banu, it isn't really slavery. It's more like indentured servitude, and it's kind of the core of their ideology because of the Sulis.
I had to control myself there. I almost broke into Old Man Hurston.
Yeah.
they look at Old Man Hurston and go, well, that's just what we're doing with extra steps. Come on.
Yeah.
It's this concept of indentureship, which of course was what America in the early days was I was going to say what it was built on, but I don't mean the slavery. I mean in terms of Scottish, English, and Welsh
getting settlers to show up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you would say, okay, yeah, I will go to America, and in return for my passage, I will work on building this town for 2 years, and that was how a lot of the early 13 colonies was settled, and that's like an idea that they run with. Now it's all about these contracts, so you could end up signing a contract which means that you are down a salt mine and being worked to death, and that is, and Banu would look at that and go, well, you should have read the fine print. So,
well, man, Hurston says that all the time.
Exactly.
Ooh, we should have read the contract.
But basically, everyone in like large parts of the society are in these contracts, and it's just a matter of
you're literally born into these contracts because like you have to pay off your debt for being
schooling.
Born.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you will come when they buy you as a child from the child rearing Suli. They'll be buying off your debt, and then you're paying off your debt to the Suli that bought you, and so forth.
Yeah.
So
whatever your price is what you have to, you owe them back. It's like those really, really like the kind of the meme of the very penny pinching parent who's like, you're gonna pay off your entire like for all 18 years of education and rent. What was that, Smithers or it was a Simpsons joke? Was that was it Principal Skinner who's like he has to pay off all his debt from his mom, that kind of thing. That's kind of the idea.
And
I guess they're making it easy for you by letting you work from age 6. So
yeah.
and we look at it, we look and say, oh, they've got slavery, and you enter into a contract with them, and it's slavery, but it's totally different from. I don't even think it's akin to ancient slavery of like the Roman, where you could actually eventually earn your freedom. It's almost. It feels almost like a fosterage, where you'd send your child to your friend or your ally, and they would raise your child and train them and do all the other stuff, and then it's almost that type of
like an apprenticeship is what someone
it's almost like an apprenticeship. You sign on and work, and then you.
Like an old school, like, you be a printer's apprentice. You're going to go work for the printer when you're like 13 to you're about like 25 or whatever. You're paying off that kind of sort of that deal. So,
I mean, yeah, they still do have like the bad kind. So
yes.
they will still buy, like a bunch of slaves that some pirates have caught and send them down to work in the mines until they're dead. But I think that the more interesting aspect of all this is that they write up, and I'm doing big air quotes on the webcam here, slavery as a parody of the capitalism in the UEE. And it is just saying, like, look, these guys, they aren't free to leave. They've got to stay at work in order to get food and board. Those guys in the UEE, if they stop working, they'll just starve to death. Is that freedom? And like, basically drawing these very direct parallels between something that we are invited to call slavery and how people are actually treated in the real world. It's kind of it's quite on the nose, but it's there.
And we call it slavery using the UEE lingua franca, but I doubt that term. That's how we've translated the term that the Banu use. But do the Banu even really have a term for slavery in the concept that we use it as? And but to them, it's almost feels like it's an indentured. You are indentured. You're working to pay off your debt. It's not you're in shackles and your chattel. And like you even look at the way a Sului dissolves when the founder retires. The Sului dissolves and everything is just divvied up. So that would also include the slaves. And there's even a story of one indentured human who is given the ship by the Sului leader when he retires.
Yeah, I mean, there's there's a famous one who actually founded basically the only settlement of Hadrian, who was sold by her parents to the Banu. Like, she was from Nemo. her parents obviously didn't like her or got into debt or something like that, and they sold her when she was like 13 to a bunch of Banu, and she ended up working as a translator for negotiators. And then she, when she was able to pay off her debt, she ended up becoming a very like more Banu than human in terms of her culture, because she actually created a flotilla, which is what the landing zone reef. It's something reef. She called it the Banu word for reef, and because it looked like reef when she was growing up on Nemo. And they call it the Banu word for reef. So it's basically reef. But
and they do have a phrase for those really bad ones where people end up being worked to death. Billy O'Droyai. That damn fine print.
The damn fine print. Read. It reminds me very much of. It reminds me very much of the. There are some. There's some cultures in I think it's Japan and maybe Korea, where it's very much like a. He doesn't read the air properly. Like you just don't get the societal, and so you just stumble into things constantly. That kind of like, well, you should have just paid attention to where you were, kind of thing. Yeah.
But you do raise a really interesting point about language, because, of course, we call it the Banu Protectorate, and a protectorate in the real world usually means a nation which is protected by a larger nation. But that's not the case with the Banu Protectorate, and it's just a literal translation of their word, which I think is ektai or something like that, which just means the place that is protected. And so they've just translated that literally, and it's actually the same root word as in the Banu Protector, oktai. The ship. So
yeah, okay.
A little bit of language.
The Defender
stuff for you.
It's called okay. That makes sense. All right. Well, that's the Banu in a nutshell. There's a lot more. There's an entire. I'll link it in the video for those of you wondering. That there's an entire language guide which has a bunch of different cultural aspects to the Banu. It has the language as well, but it has a bunch of different like stories and things like that. I believe it was. Is it the UEE diplomatic corps that did that one as well as the Xi'an, or is that a different?
No, it's the Rust Society.
Rust Society did it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's done from the perspective of business people who want to do trade in the Banu Protectorate.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, with that, let's go to the next major discovery or discussion with the Xi'an. Go ahead there, Jale.
Oh, well, we've got to start about 3 hours now. Because we can talk cuisine, we can talk poetry, we can go in. Yeah, I've got this down to like my usual page and a half potted Xi'an for you, but
yeah, there's a lot. There's probably a lot more Xi'an than there are even Banu. It helps the fact that they actually chronicle their history, but
Yeah, I mean, A, they have a history, and B, they were the first race to really get fleshed out properly.
Mm-hmm.
And we've ripped off any of the lore community, because this episode could have been 3 distinct episodes in itself.
Oh, yeah. Probably, it might end up being. We might end up doing these individually in more depth, at some point. But
we should get a Q&A of these. I think like a Q&A on each alien, that would probably be the best way to do that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the Xi'an Empire, it started out as in the writing of Star Citizen as the classic archetype of that ancient, advanced, and rational race that's a bit snooty towards the humans. So it's kind of like the Vulcans of Star Trek, the Elves of Tolkien, or the Asgard of Stargate. And they've written up from that point. They fleshed out what I think is quite an interesting alien civilization. So the relationship with humanity is quite strained, with a pretty tense hostage situation first contact, followed by a 250-year Cold War, which was very much stoked and encouraged by the Mesa regime. And indeed, it was the end of that Cold War that immediately preceded the end of the Mesa era, as you can listen in our previous episodes. However, today, the two empires, the Xi'an and the human, are growing closer in trade and commerce with its own involved tensions. So let's talk about their physiology. Xi'an are a turtle-like, cold-blooded species. They developed from a prey species that had carrion as a large part of their diet, which has led to a modern cuisine centered around fermentation and pickling, with absolutely no cooking by heat. A key aspect of their physiology is the ability to slow down their metabolism, allowing the world to seem to speed up around them. This is used for feats of endurance, such as in the Koyakoa endurance racing, for artistic purposes and their music. So you get these operas which sound like slowed down music that can last for days, and all the audience is kind of going into this state to experience the music at a faster rate than it's actually being played. And also they meditate in these states. Now, Xi'an society is built around groups called yu'er, which is sometimes translated as houses or lines. They're not merely genetic families in our sense of the world. They are genetically, the Xi'an are very obsessed with genetics, so they are genetically linked, but they're not like your nuclear family. It's rather a political and economic structure more akin to a state or a nation. The major yu'er like Ngatak, Poa, and Twail can own entire planets. Prime amongst these is the Imperial House Krei, which by tradition encompasses the two wings of the central bureaucracy, which has a military branch, which is the largest standing army of the empire, and the civil branch, which makes up the Xi'an central government and civil service. All young Xi'an serve in the bureaucracy for 30 Xi'an years, starting at age 40, during which time they actually ceremonially leave their yu'er and join the Imperial yu'er. The bureaucracy assigns monopolistic control of industries to individual lines. So Poa is the only house that builds military craft through their corporation Al Poa, while Twail are in control of the garment business. It's implied that minor houses are bound through their industrial links to larger ones. So if there's a house that had a monopoly on making zippers and buttons and fasteners, that they would therefore be a satellite house linked to House Twail. That system is obviously quite inefficient for an economy, but there is an interesting historical basis behind it. That basis is that the Xi'an history is really dominated by this intensely scarring memory of the Great Divide, which was this huge civil war fought around 20,000 BCE, after they were already organized into yu'er as they are today, but it was before they'd left their home system, so they hadn't discovered jump drives and jump points. At this point in their history, they had colonized other worlds within their system, so it's like they had their equivalent of Mars was quite well colonized at this point, and they were fighting this huge civil war between the houses. And then, in an assassination attempt gone wrong, one of the houses tried to use these ancient climate stabilizing satellites around their homeworld to assassinate the leadership of the other houses, but actually set off a chain reaction that destroyed their homeworld, essentially turning it into a Venusian-like smog planet and annihilating a large chunk of their species. And this atrocity is what resonates through, tens of thousands of years later. It led them to reform their society under a new system of having a single imperial house that would govern a system that would make that kind of war functionally impossible to happen again. Because you can't go to war with a house that you're completely economically dependent on. That button house can't really rebel against House Twail because they've got no other garment house, and the garment house can't destroy the house that builds buttons because where are they going to get their buttons from? But so that would happen on that sort of vertical level, but as a horizontal level, you can't go to war with the house that's fully agricultural because then you won't have any food, and vice versa with the clothes. Paul, you had a
I just had an observation of it. It would be really funny to see Button House go up against the Garment House and just have them throw buttons and pieces of cloth at each other, trying to victory, because they don't even have weapons because it's the Weapon House. You gotta go. Yeah. Or even imagine the Weapon House being like, we're gonna suppress these other houses. It's like, with what? The firing pins that we make? You can't even use these firing pins. So yeah,
exactly.
And the argument that you can't use our buttons. We want to use. No, you've got to just a whole. Yeah, you could see
with the length of Xi'an lives, that can be a very complicated, lengthy negotiations about what type of button should be used on a certain shirts.
No, little Pepper.
It's got to happen. Unless they're like anti-grav buttons.
Yeah,
but I could see them being like ants. Just that having an ant meet. And
very
taking an hour or 2 days to do the greetings, and
then of course, if there are any problems, if there was a situation where Button House and Garment House were getting a bit heated, the Emperor's got the biggest guns, so because they control the military. So this was the system they made to prevent any chance of recurrence of that Great Divide. So also, as a result of that, they became a little quite more conniving because they still obviously want to compete with each other, but it's all done through spies and industrial sabotage and proxies and so forth, which we'll come back to. Another part of that Reformation of society was they founded a religion based on avoiding war called Litovar, the Path of Peace, and that is their official state religion. It's not a mystical religion, or it's not said to be mystical in any way. It's more like a philosophy and like a little bit more like the more kind of grounded parts of like Buddhist philosophy of centering oneself and knowledge and lack of knowledge. It's centered on a planet called Raipuang, which is a nearly tidally locked planet, which means it rotates very, very slowly, and it has a day length of exactly 100 Xi'an years, which they took to mean like, oh, this is a special planet. And one of the deepest things you can do in that faith is meditate on that planet for one whole day, i.e. 100 years. The two other major events in Xi'an history are the Spirit Wars and the Dark. The Spirit Wars were fought with their as of yet mysterious adversaries of the Cathach, and what little we know about the Cathach come from the Xi'an, who relate stories of their calculated savagery. In one instance, the Cathach attacked a naval base on the equivalent of Invictus Day, slaughtering all the new recruits, which was a blow not just to the military power of the Xi'an, but also this real kind of vicious cut to the core of the Xi'an psyche, because that was like, these people all represent the next generation. They represent the investment in their genetic lineages, and it's all gone in a flash. The Spirit Wars came to a close, or at least a pause, when the Cathach assassinated the Imperial House, which left a massive power vacuum and created a 150-year interregnum called the Dark. With no emperor in place, there was more conflict between the houses, and there was a lot more assassination going on. And that all ended when House Cray ascended to the throne. Basically, enough people got behind one house and go, okay, right, these guys are the ones. And they're actually, House Cray previously were a house of spies and military intelligence, which again gives you the sense of what they value. Life for a member of the Xi'an Empire is significantly defined by the Yiwa that they belong to and its matriarchal leadership. The clothes you wear will be requisitioned from the line stores, the food from their acquisitions, and there's no real concept of shopping in their society, at least until they got it from us. Their economy is almost essentially communist within the Yiwa, and then more like international diplomacy and trade between the different Yiwa. That isn't all there is to Xi'an society, though, because most Xi'an form what's called a Piahai, which is a bond group family, which isn't necessarily like your closest relatives. It's actually implied maybe to be like a polyamorous group where all the adult Xi'an in there are romantically intertwined. And that's the main unit that you live with, raise children with, and share your actual lives with. Though you wouldn't have your children with the other members of that group because that is entirely controlled by the Yiwa, who reproduction is entirely transactional and contractual. Romantic love and reproduction are completely separate for them.
It's very Banu.
What's
Banu.
that?
That's a very Banu.
Banu love to bang, but then they just like, okay, we got a child, so let's sell it. Whereas, like,
what's a transaction? One gets a little bit more pleasure out of the transaction beforehand, but that's
yeah. Let's not go too deep into that.
Yeah, that's not.
We don't want to become that podcast.
No.
So, Xi'an technology is formidable compared to humans, though somewhat stagnant in its development. Their small ships favor maneuverability thanks to their thrusters. They can change direction. You all know the Cartual. The anti-grav technology permeates even the most basic of items, and they'll use it for something as frivolous as like setting the table for dinner, just sort of like that Disney cartoon with all the plates dancing along.
Be our guest. Yeah.
I was thinking actually of the Magician's Apprentice, or was it the Black Cauldron?
The Black Cauldron. Yeah.
And that's also the larger ships tend to be quite vertical because they're using anti-grav to get around them. Just last little point about their personalities: you can trust a Xi'an so long as you trust that they're acting in their best interests. They are known to have plans within plans, and famously during a Senate hearing about a military contract, it was revealed that the company Toral Aggregate, who are their gun makers, had been planning a bid for 30 years, which actually predated the treaty that would have allowed them to bid for that contract. That's how far ahead they plan. So they're not inherently duplicitous, but because you basically should assume that they're always going to be 3 steps ahead, a lot of people have trouble trusting them. So yeah, like I say, you can trust them as long as you trust that they are working in their best interests, and they're probably going to be ahead of the game on you. So
Well,
yeah, that's
a bit
my
like
pottish-
Nimbari. Nimbari never lie.
Yeah. Oh, I was gonna say it feels very like we always joke that the community likes to think that the Banu are the Ferengi, but I was like, nah, it's a little bit more like Xi'an. The fact that they always have a plan. There's always something happening in the background. You just don't know what. Well, maybe more like Romulans, I guess, is more like that. It's like
I think the Cardassians might be a better one. You know, it's like which parts of this are true, or all the parts are true, even the lies.
Even the lies, yeah.
Yeah,
especially the lies. Yeah.
Especially the lies. Yeah, I think that like Garak has some elements of that. I mean, there's no direct parallel. They are a lot. If we're going to go Star Trek with it, they are kind of the logical aspect of the Vulcan and the sort of we know more than you kind of aspect of that. The sort of subterfuge of the Cardassians. I wouldn't go so far Ferengi. I mean, because they're just profit obsessed.
Yeah,
they're more like
obsessed.
power. Yeah, they want more like power and influence.
Yeah, I see the Banu being that Ferengi just because of that money, the rules of acquisition and all the rest of it just seem Ferengi. Whereas the Xi'an seem to be more elven, manipulate, rule from do things from the background. Certainly Minbari, Minbari in Babylon 5 apparently don't lie, but I'm not saying anything now, and I wasn't saying anything then.
Mm-hmm.
That type of thing. You've got to list.
Yeah.
They won't lie, but they won't necessarily tell you the truth.
I always
out.
I was talking about the Kurthok recently and how the Xi'an reacted to the Kurthok, to humanity trying to a small group of secret cabal of senators try to send an emissary to the Kurthok through Xi'an space. And like when I read that, I guess now hindsight's 2020, but whatever. But I was like, at the time, like this is a terrible idea. You're gonna get caught in like 2 seconds. Like these people like live in subterfuge. That's their daily life. They breathe it. They have to survive. Like you're sending a ex-con to go talk with the second most powerful race in the galaxy. I don't think that's gonna end well.
and their emperor is like a
spy head. He's like
spy head.
He's like the former leader of a spy family. Like,
yeah. One other thing about the Kathak that we can tell from what we know about the Xi'an, because of how because we know about the Kathak from the Xi'an. That's the only contact we have. Their name Kathak actually implies that that's a word from the Kathak language. It's not a Xi'an word. It's not a native Xi'an word. It's missing vowels essentially. Mm-hmm. So whoever the Kathak are, their language probably sounds a little bit like Kurthak. So,
okay. Yeah, I actually was going to ask a question about that. Do they call humans something different, or do they call us just humans? Do they use our own language?
They call us humans. They call us humans. They call Banu Panu. They call Vandal Wantul, which are just like the closest transliterations they can do.
Okay.
Just like the Banu call humans Humano. They call tevarin Tefarino. So
nice. Okay.
Always having our linguist on, isn't it?
Yes.
They pepper so many hints in the languages, so you gotta delve in.
Like if you really want to know these languages, like Banu and Xi'an, if you want to learn about them, read the language guides because there is so much lore and like their cultures and everything else like that. A lot of people were surprised, like, oh well, you've got the mud baths of the Banu merchantmen, and it's like it's not really a mud bath. It's not really even healing. It's just part of their culture, or the wall scratchers of the Xi'an. You just sit there and got your back.
Yep. I like the idea of the mud baths, because it kind of it kind of answered that question. Why do we have spa pools on our luxury ships? It's because it's almost as if we're mirroring the Banu idea of we've got to have a bath. But for us, it seems out of place. But for the Banu, it's like it's what we do. It's how we socialize. It's like going to the bar. For them, we go to the spa or the mud pool.
And I also like the Xi'an, the fact that they're carrions that still continues today, where like everything is fermented or rotted or partially rotted, and they have these tubes that you eat out of, like these tubes that preserve the food that they then
it's the fermentation vessels, and
yeah.
They wouldn't like go like, oh, roadkill, that's tasty. It's very precise. They, like I say, they're obsessed with their own genetics. They're also really obsessed with the genetics of their microorganisms that they use for their so it's like your friend who has the sourdough starter, but like to a whole industrial scale. And that does seem to be one of the things that although the raw materials of food production will be are made by one of the lines, I can't remember which off the top of my head, each individual line does their own food preparation from those raw materials and are very protective of their house strains and their particular microorganisms.
I mean, yeah, and you mentioned that they go to so far as to, like, if I remember correctly about the dark, the reason why it took them so long was because they had to find a very specific genetic code, which is supposed to be for the imperial house, which may or may not be just tradition or whatever, but it's like it was that like micro DNA strand or whatever that they needed to find.
And the Spy Master's house finds it. Yeah.
I think that was an idea that they walked back from. They were originally thinking of, I think that they were kind of cribbing an idea from the Dalai Lama, where they pick the next Dalai Lama by sort of going, oh, this guy over here, this kid, he is the Dalai Lama, which in like, they were going to have it like, oh, they do a big genome sequencing and find the child who has the most genetic markers. I think that they walked back from that idea because it was a little bit. They walked into they decided to go more with just like
eugenicists a little bit. Yeah.
And also it's also getting into the politics of Tibet, and it's like, okay, no, they're just they've had 3 different imperial families. The first one just like they just died out, and they elected a new one. The second one got assassinated, and the third one is ruling. So that's how they do it now. And I think the fact that the Dark went on for 150 years, that's actually quite a short period for them. That's
for us, we think, oh, it's 3 generations, but for them, it's not even.
It's not even a generation yet, because they live 900 to 1,000 years. So
yeah. In fact, like the current emperor was a child when humanity was discovered by the Xi'an. So
the current emperor predates Ivan Meza. That is the big takeaway. Like, and that staggers me. Like, everyone says, "Oh, they're friendly, they're good."
Yeah,
plans within plans, wheels within wheels.
I've always got that niggling warning bells going off. These guys live for 1,000 years. The current emperor's was a kid when Ivan Meza was coming to power. Rising to power. That's the same guy. The same emperor who was kind of, that guy, it makes you go, they have a long memory. Don't make them enemies.
Yeah, he was born like 14 years after Ivan Meza, the current emperor. Earth years.
14 years after.
Yeah, as in like so Ivan Meza was born 2516. 14 years later, you've got Emperor Cray being born, and then so he's then 16 years old, so like very young child when Ivan Meza comes to power.
Yeah.
And he's only halfway through his life, because it's 400-500 years. So
no, he's quite old now.
He's quite old now.
Like they
I thought I'd read
like 600 years.
He's almost
I thought
retired.
I'd read they lived 500 to 600 years, but Paul had said
I might be
800,000
wrong on that
so-
one. Yeah, 500.
Yeah, I mean, like we're talking in hyperbole. I mean, I imagine that very old ones might push it up, but the current emperor, he's quite old. He doesn't have any heir, and it's a little bit up in the air who's going to be the next emperor when he finally goes, and it might not be that long.
I'm looking forward to that because that's definitely a hint by CIG that they want to do a little something with players having involved with the Xi'an.
They want to have a Xi'an Empire breaking apart and
Dark 2.0, the darkening.
The darkening.
Dark harder.
But then there's also now the issue of how do the Xi'an take to the regen tech that humanity's developed?
That's a question we don't know. Yeah.
And that's something we don't know. Do they see it as an abomination? Do they see it as a spirit war issue? Do they see it as a as something they can take on, which means Emperor Cray could live on,
continue living? Well, yeah, because you also have the we don't know if it would work for the tevarin, if it would work for the Banu or the Xi'an. Just humanity is what we know right so far, and it's so new. So,
and
I mean, I would also see that with their level of technology, that the 500 to 600 years isn't probably a natural lifespan anyway. They could well have a natural lifespan that is essentially like a modern human, and what we're seeing in them is just that's how they become once they've got with their technology, with everything that they have, they've extended their lifespan out to this sort of extremely long, and that's just what they take as fact now. That's just like, that's how long everyone lives now.
Yeah.
Just like humans live up to 150 years old without much problem in the UEE, and that's just normal now. So I kind of think that actually they probably anything that we can come up with to prolong our life, they probably came up with in like 30,000 BC.
Yeah.
And it's like way in their bus, like, you're just getting to that point now? Come on, guys.
Yeah, because we're but children.
The one thing they can't do, though, the one thing that they'd love to do that they can't terraform Venusian worlds, and nobody can, and that's why they can't get their home world back. So their new home world is their version of, and they can see their home planet in the night sky completely dead, and they know they can't fix it.
Yeah, I've always
if we work out how to fix terraform a small planet.
Yeah. There's two more things.
The tevarin the Xi'an will probably steal it.
Well, the Xi'an will probably negotiate for it or already have it by the time we finish doing it. It's probably funded by a Xi'an company, 30 years ago. They started that 150 years ago when they when they saw the writing on the wall for the Mezzers, and we're like, all right, let's make sure that this guy who may be born, this guy or gal may be born in 150 years, gets this tech going. I always find it fascinating about the Xi'an for two reasons. One, which is they were really chill when we found their version of Holy Land, their Holy Land, because we just stumbled into their Holy Land, and they were just like, "Yes, please don't come here." Like,
back the way you came. Thank you very much.
But they didn't. They weren't like back the way you came. Here's all of my guns pointed at your head. It was just like, please leave right now.
They didn't need to. No, they did keep those pilots for a couple of days. And check out their ships.
That's like 5 minutes of their time.
Yeah.
But still, for the pilots, and if it was a bit of a concern.
I do like
yes, it was.
Was that the story where she was like cheering her head off? No. There was another pilot who cheered her head off when she found a jump point and managed to jump right into like the military headquarters of the Xi'an. She came right out into a Xi'an fleet and screamed her head off. She was like, yes, oh my God, like right into a fleet.
Back out the other way, yep.
And the other one was how the criminal houses.
Yeah, I think you're going to ask. Yeah, the what was it? Yotonghuita, which are, you can call them like Xi'an Mafia, Xi'an Yakuza. They are houses that have a monopoly on crime, and this is where this whole idea of like proxy wars come in, because you'll have the Yotonghuita that you deal with, kind of waylaying the ships that belong to the house you don't like. But it's all kind of very plausible deniability, and they have this whole extra language around it. So Yuotong Huita means like the caregivers for the community or something like that. So it's very much like Cosa Nostra.
It felt like Shinobi during the war, the Warring Houses period in Japan, where like the Shinobi would just constantly go between the different houses and be like, "You want to pay us money? We'll do all those assassinations or spy jobs for you." You know, but if you got the right cash, we'll go for it. Or if you help us out in a certain way. So because then they were eventually protected by the I can't remember the name of the big emperor that was big in Japan during, like, kind of ended the Warring States period, but Tokugawa, I think, who they protected him during his lowest moment, and that kind of stuff. So it's very similar to that. Let's move on to the last species we're going to talk to, the tevarin, Mr. Algarid. Why don't you go get started with us?
Although the tevarin live amongst us, and we've fought wars against them, and we've occupied their homeland, and we can see the remnants of their cities in Elysium and the other systems that they had explored and colonized, we actually know very little about their ancient history and their culture. And partly because they destroyed it in the Purge. And so what we know, we have to gain from the little bits of the ancient writings that we've been able to acquire, and also the archaeology. And so far, we know very little of that. Very little of that has actually come down to us as in the game world. What we do know, though, is, if I understand correctly, like humanity and the Xi'an, their past is dark. You know, that they weren't the apex predator on their home system. We know that there are predators, but we haven't got any archaeological evidence to determine what type of predators these were. And the lore team have deliberately left that vague, in terms of they want to say, yes, there are predators. They were these big, nasty, horrible, scary predators. What they were, what they looked like, and all the rest of it, they've left blank, so that if the art team decide at some point they need a nasty, bloodthirsty, monstrous, scary beastie, they can say, oh yes, it's one of them. And they've even put the idea that they could be in an enclave somewhere on Caliph or Jalen, or it could have been put onto a preserve on another planet, or some could have escaped and done whatever. So we've got that aspect with them. I do think from the readings and the information we've got from the writings of Ajora, that we could speculate that these monstrous, horrible, scary monsters were some flying creature or a tree-dwelling creature that was up in the heights, because one of the tenets of Ajora was basically you walk together and you look to the sky, but on the ground. So you're kind of always looking up to make sure there's nothing going to get you. So that kind of gives that aspect of their culture. And their culture seems to be that they work together, that because of that threat that they had when they weren't the dominant species, they had to work together. And Rajora put that idea forward that you do everything for the good of the society. And so you would have your farmers, and your farmers, even though they're lowly workers, they were valued because they're doing something for the good of the society. I get the feeling they could be a bit like, I know in the past we've said they're very much like the Japanese, but in a sense they almost feel like they could be like the ancient Chinese, where farmers were kind of seen as being higher value, at least socially, but in theory, whereas merchants were seen as the scum of the earth because they just took and didn't add anything to anybody. So you seem to have this idea of everyone does a certain role, and everyone is working for the good of the society. Rajora also states that suicide is a bad thing. You never commit suicide. You never take an act in a dishonourable manner. So if you're losing a battle, to commit suicide is dishonourable. And so the Tears of Fire with Caliph, where he flies his ships into Caliph to return home. if you look at the Rajora in the purest sense, that is a great dishonour. It's dishonouring the whole idea of what Rajora seem to stand for. And you see that come through in the Instrument of the Surrender story. Now, the question there is whether that is actually picking up actual tevarin knowledge, whether it's the fiction putting in what we think that would go as. And so that's one of the other issues we get with looking at the tevarin. We've got some fictional stories in the lore, as well as the things like Star Watch and Parker Terrell's Plain Truth, as well as the Congress Now articles as well. So there's a bit of a mishmash of where we get our information for. We do know that, unlike the claims from the Meso period, they are not carrion feeders. They do tend to eat lots of grainy type things. So one of their foods, which we find in Star Watch, is kol iva, which is basically a seed ball thing, apparently mixed with a kind of like peanut butter mixed with ketchup is apparently what it tastes like. So seed balls of peanut butter, of peanuts, mixed with a ketchup into a little round ball, and they'll munch on those things all day. And so that gives us that aspect of their culture as well. So they're constantly nibbling or feeding. So that's their kind of food aspect. In terms of their in terms of the class, like I said, you've got the different groups, and they always work together for the whole. In terms of the attempt to take over the homeworld and flying the ships into the planet, that to me raises the question of, was he actually breaking Rajora, or was he actually keeping his word? His word was, because word seems to be honourable, you need to keep your word. Koloth Torah made the promise, I will get you to our homeworld. He can't get them to the homeworld without surrendering, and so he does that by what he sees as the only way he can do it honourably, but you've got to take that whichever way you like. The other thing we've got with the tevarin is we've got two branches of tevarin now. We've got the tevarin who live in the diaspora and in places like Brana, and we've also got the tevarin who live within the UEE. And they've both taken totally different views on as they try to rediscover Rajora and their sense of being. And one of the problems is after the fall of at the end of the Second Tevarin War, Tevarin went, Rajora failed. It doesn't work. And so they literally purged everything. What we've got is what we managed to save, what humanity managed to stop them destroying, or what was off on the little provinces somewhere in outside of UEE space. And so as the diaspora happened and they spread out and went to those places, the question is how much have they morphed those teachings and that culture to be a totally anti-human, hatred-driven culture, and how much the attempt to find their culture in UE space has been warped and manipulated as well. And you see that kind of discussion go in the article on Home Sweet Home, where you've got the Tevarin who decides, no, I'm going to take my daughter and live on a Tevarin enclave. And they find that the teachings in Rajora are not teaching, that they get the idea that those teachings in Rajora in Brana were more the hate-filled aspect and not looking after the good of the community. So when he saw elements going on in the community weren't right, he went to the community leaders and they basically said, no, go away. Don't stop, just worry about your own stuff, ignore this stuff. And so he was of the opinion, this is not what I understand Rajora to be. And so he ended up going back to Vega, even though he had so many problems and there was so much almost an endemic prejudice against the Tevarin, and the Tevarin weren't being given funds to rebuild. He still saw that as a better, that aspect of the Tevarin culture. He saw it healthier and better than the hatred and the lack of care and concern for the whole community that he was expecting and hoping to find in Branna. And so we've got that aspect of where the tevarin are sitting at the moment. We do know that in Cabal, we recently found a whole pile of tevarin artifacts. There are some dispute as to when those findings were. I always understood they were kind of post-tevarin war type caches of weapons and stuff, which seemed to make sense with the Esperia going in and being invited to check out the site and do the archaeological work on those sites. Much to the consternation of Sojkozi, who wanted to, and other tevarin cultural groups who wanted to go and do the work and find the stuff about their culture and help them rebuild it. But we allowed the weapons or shipbuilders to go in and examine the ancient stuff and put the work out, and that happened just before the Talon fighters were released as well. And so we've got this kind of humanity's kind of finding tevarin archaeological sites, but then keeping it under lock and key, and the only tevarin allowed to go and study there are those working who are allowed to work there via Esperia. But the cultural groups and organisations haven't been allowed to go in and do the archaeological work. So there's this effort by humanity, I think, still to keep them downtrodden, and yet there's another element that seems to be seeking to raise tevarin culture up. And I think they've deliberately left tevarin culture as this nebulous idea, as something that, as the game goes on and eventually as it becomes the player race, which I expect it'll be probably the first, I hope it'll be the first player race we're allowed to play. And I think I've heard Jake also wants the tevarin to be a player race. Paul, I think I've heard you say that, so you'll have to confirm or deny that.
It makes sense. They've been serving in the military for hundreds of years now. And if they're serving in the military, that means that all human stuff, the stuff we have in game right now, is compatible with tevarin and human physiology. So,
yeah.
It's the easiest to slip in because the background of a tevarin isn't that different from the background of human, because effectively tevarin are the second race. Though there are Banu and Xi'an who live and are citizens of the UEE. Tevarin are probably the biggest non-human population in the UEE. So.
Yeah, well, even if we look at the Tevarin Wars, after the Second Tevarin War, originally it was said that after we captured them, we took them off to the Senate and we terraformed the world. So we even changed the look of the world to get, after the Tevarin Wars to fix it. And yet Tevarin breathed the same atmosphere as us, and we didn't. And then later stuff says we didn't terraform the world. And so there's this kind of, what did we do? And I think the idea is that we terraformed it by giving it by almost salting the earth, by trying to get rid of the Tevarin stuff, and yet keeping kind of Carthage type stuff, and yet what we kept was really only the spoils of war. We kept the Tevarin culture of the temples and things were basically the in your face, we've beaten you, sucked in, these are our trophies of war.
I always thought it would have been nice, and they could still do this, to give tevarin, it's kind of borrowing idea from Mass Effect actually, that they might have a respiratory problem from living in what we consider to be the comfortable human environments, because maybe their comfortable environments on their homeworld might have been drier, and then that terraforming was, we want to up the humidity because it's just a bit more comfortable for us. Something like Xi'an really, really like it much warmer. 30 degrees is their kind of room temperature and very humid. So I think like giving the different races these different realms of comfort, even if they can all coexist, and then we imposed our level of comfort on their home world, is like an ultimate humiliation.
Yeah.
And
I
go on, Paul.
Go ahead, Joe. Yeah.
There you go.
No, I was just going to say, Jale, you have more to say?
I was going to say, I think that the thing to remember about what we know about the tevarin is we know about as much about the tevarin as we did about the Xi'an before they published the language guide and big presentation at CitizenCon in 2017, and about as much of them as we knew about the Banu before they did that in 2019 for the Banu, which is why I was really looking forward to 2021 being maybe the year that they would do the tevarin, and they still haven't. And I don't even think there is a lore session on the CitizenCon this year. So fingers crossed for 2023, they're going to finally go, okay, meet the tevarin. Here we go. This is the big drop.
My argument is that, and I think in 2021 they probably did the Vanduul, and they just haven't told us yet, because the Vanduul are very important for Squadron 42, and they were starting a lot of that early on, so they probably were trying to finalize some of that, and that's not something you would tell players before.
Quite possibly, yeah.
Yeah, because especially since we didn't know a lot about the Vanduul until the 2940s, so that's a huge time period when you would see, like when the game takes place. So.
Yeah, it's certainly with the tevarin, there's a lot we can learn, and yet there's a lot that's deliberately left vague just because it's been wiped out. So there is certainly lots for the Society of Artifact Finders, or whatever your guild is called, Paul, to engage in. I'm sure old man Hurston would be keen to.
The League of Relic Enthusiasts, yes.
Well, the League of Relic Enthusiasts.
We are not the British Museum. We are more like the Smithsonian Museum. We won't take our artifacts from places. We will buy them. And it's not that it belongs in a museum. It just belongs in our museum. Nobody else is going to preserve these artifacts. We will.
I thought I saw one episode where you were doing the relic, the Society of Relic Collectors, and you were going pew pew. We'll gather these artifacts by force.
Yes, it is tactical archaeology, ballistic archaeology, where the artifacts are there, but there's these pirates who live on top of them. So we have to kill the pirates to get the artifacts in new ways. So it's archaeology by gun,
by other means.
But not British archaeology, because it's not like we're got a flag or anything like that. It's definitely British archaeology. We're just
aggressive excavation.
Yes, we're just the British Museum. That's all we are. Was that it for?
You knock the British Museum. It's a wonderful institution. You can come here. You can see all your country's best bits.
It's one of those things. I'm sure the British Museum is very sad about, because I'm sure they don't want like that. I'm sure the modern British Museum is very apologetic, and I know they've been doing their best to try to bring back.
They're very embarrassed. Yes, they are. Yeah,
they want to try to repatriate a lot of those exhibits, or at least pay for those exhibits that they have, and get try to do their best. They're trying to do their best. I mean,
it's literally around the corner from a museum which is entirely full of stuff taken from Egyptian tombs.
Yes,
which is like, from the top of the rafters down to the foundations, all the worst thing.
Yeah.
And then the British Museum is just around the corner, and they get more attention.
They get more flack.
Yeah.
And in fairness to the British Museum and the Brits at the time when they were doing that, everybody was doing that. It wasn't.
Not everyone was doing that. A lot of people had that being done to them.
Yeah, well, but the Russians would have been doing that to if they could. The Germans would have been doing it. The French were doing it. That type of thing.
All the colonial powers were being colonialists.
All the colonial powers were doing that type of stuff, because that's what you do. Yeah. But yeah, it's a.
I recommend the Grant Museum. It's a wonderful museum of zoology in the same part of town. And it is an absolutely lovely collection of skeletons and various other bits. A beautiful collection of blown glass figurines. So
nice.
If you're in that part of town and you don't want to go to the British Museum, go to the Grant Museum. It's just a little place in UCL, and that's the place to go.
Good enough. All right. Well, I think that was it for about tevarin, right? You had nothing else?
Yeah, I'm pretty certain that's it. I have 19 pages of summary notes from all the bits and pieces that I've dug up over the time, and so I certainly haven't covered all, but a lot did get covered in our very first article. We looked at the Tevarin Wars and looking at the Tevarin and First Contact.
Yeah, I mean the thing
go
about
back and watch those episodes.
Yes,
Sorry,
the thing about the tevarin that's fascinating is they are a species in transition. They're a culture in transition, and they're caught in the middle because they were forced to transition. They originally were they had unified shortly before humanity had made contact with them, and they were already overpopulated because they did not have terraforming technology. So they did not have the ability to change planets to what they needed to, and they had recently united under a single warlord. And they did, they did not have
that. They had the jump drive technology. They didn't have the ability to terraform planets. So they'd go into a system, and then if the system could be settled, they'd settle it. But if it couldn't be settled, then they just had to set up domes or outposts that were fully enclosed, and so that limited their breadth. Whereas we were able to go in and terraform a system and change it to our atmosphere and expand that way.
And we can already see a little bit of the retcon because the original, and this may also be explained away as just bad science by the guy who discovered the tevarin, for the first human to run into the tevarin. He said, "Oh yeah, they're a primitive species. They're not as powerful as we are." But now we know today, like half of our military technology comes from the tevarin. We've completely stolen them and retro engineered them, from shield tech to weapons tech to maneuverability tech. Like the Gladius is 100% just human tevarin hybrid. They just took what they learned from the Talons that they captured and they turned them into human ships. So it's very interesting to see those sorts of changes. And I remember there was one mention that there's about a tevarin. There's at least one tevarin on every ship in the UE. At least one. It's very rare that you don't see a tevarin in the military. So just to kind of give you a concept, give the viewers and the listeners concepts of like how common the tevarin are in the UE.
And yet the tevarin are also, because of their past situation, are also come across as these cynical, dour, sad, or angry individuals, and so
like they've got that reputation of being criminals because they had to survive.
Yeah. But even if you look at the stories like Orbital Supermax, which was a story set on a maximum security prison, cannibals had kind of came in to try and take out a prisoner who was there, and there was a tevarin sector of prisoners, and they were, they come across as the honourable. They're still seen as gangsters, they're still seen as criminals, but they're honourable and they keep their word. And Joe?
Oh, sorry, no, I was just having a nice COVID cough.
Love those.
It was the hand that went up because I thought you were.
No, it was a mercy.
Yeah. I think that's. I mean, it's important to note that everything we just said is very brief rundown. There are at least a dozen Banu that are in lore. I didn't even talk about like the guy who discovered Tamsa from Tamsa Wheel and his whole kind of his experience, and like, and you can see a little bit more. And I know there are tons more Xi'an, individual Xi'an we could talk about that would explain like we talk about the human Xi'an co-owned world. That's still kind of a thing. Where
Oya 3,
Oya 3, which is where they found the one of a missing Carrack. Actually, Oya 3 was where there was a Carrack that went missing entirely, and they found that Carrack completely unoccupied. All of the people had left. All of the crew had been gone. It was perfectly functional.
We know what happened to them.
It seems, but it's very not.
They're being taken and are being probed.
Well, the thing is that like it's also very much not the Xi'an thing to just be that obvious. Like we just talked about how subtle they are. So if it was the Xi'an, it would be very much of the Xi'an being like, yes, this was us.
Yes, but it's this was us, and what are you going to do about it? Yeah.
Got on the wrong
but
side
that's my own prejudices coming out. I'm sure.
Well, okay, what was that, Jale?
Got on the wrong side of some Yuatong Huita.
Yeah. the captain owed them money, some kind of something like that.
They were just collecting for the charity fund.
Yes, for the neighborhood. The neighborhood. Yeah.
Do it for the neighborhood.
But yeah, there's that. There's like the entirety of the fuel company. That's one of the biggest fuel companies in the UAE. That's owned by the Xi'an. CTR, which you see signs all over Stanton for. There's the human Xi'an trade agreement, which nearly led to the assassination of an imperator. Like that's the huge reason of. It's the reason why the Xeno threat is so pissed off at people is because they mention it by name in their letter to Stanton. So,
well, and they rightly hold the citizens of Stanton and every player to account because we elected.
Oh yeah,
I would say that Xeno threat they're just Nazis, and if they say, we're annoyed about the Imperator being elected, and we're annoyed about Husha. If those two things exist, they'd be annoyed about
something else.
They want to find a justification for what they are. And they are Messerite.
Yeah. They are Meserites. I was going to say, no, they're not Nazis, they're Meserites.
They're same difference. Like,
and you got, and I'm sure our listeners have heard my theory that
on
my
Fiona Messer
not theory, but my conspiracy, my going Parker Terrell. That's it.
A Messerite will always have a reason to justify the worst excesses of their Messerite philosophy.
Yeah.
And they've chosen these things, but
But I mean,
don't be fooled.
Those are good examples of like the Xi'an play a huge role in the story. Banu play a huge role in the story, and the tevarin. These three species are probably the most important species outside of the Vandul in terms of driving the narrative. These civilizations drive the narrative of Star Citizen a lot, more than people realize. I mean, heck, one of the major players of probably one of the most well-known and beloved characters in the verse right now since the MSR release is Alexandra. What's her name? Dugan. Alex Dugan. And her co-pilot is Maz Ulan, who's a hacker. He's a Banu hacker. Yet, like we haven't seen him. He's the Chewie, but you can understand, and is really likes technology. So, there's a lot of those things.
And then you got our favorite politician. One of our favorite politicians, Cossi.
Yeah,
who's a tevarin. Who, as Paul was saying, I don't know whether you were recording at the time when we were talking about it, but we were talking about how he had the law, pushing the law to make it that all tevarin artifacts were, property of a tevarin type thing and needed to get, were
it belongs in a museum
and belong in a museum. So that's why your league is needed.
Yes.
Solj Cossi needs you.
Most Banu, when speaking with humans, prefer they/them pronouns.
Yes, that's true. Sujkosi or Banu
Maz.
Yeah.
Just pointing that out there.
Yeah. Maz. The one thing I will say is that Maz was written before they did that change.
Yeah.
So you refer to him and her as the as like the his former.
Yeah. So some will sort of choose to go, just call me he, whatever.
Yeah,
they go for they them as the official translation. That does somewhat remind. I always imagine Banu speaking like a friend of mine, a colleague of mine who is from China and is a British citizen now, but just uses he and she completely interchangeably.
Mm-hmm.
Even in one sentence, we'll just go, "Oh, what he said," and then she said, and it was like, but that's the same person. And I just always imagine that as a trait of like a Banu speaker being like, "Oh, these two words basically mean the same." Just like when I speak German, I kind of do dirty das all over the place. I'm no good at it, and
I will screw up for Spanish. I will screw up L and Ella, like feminine male words all the time in the same sentence. So yeah,
Indonesian is really easy because the pronoun for he and she is the same word, dia, and you just use it. The context tells you whether you're saying he or she. So you translate the same word just based on context. So you can say, yep, he did it, she did it, they, and just context tells you whether it's which one it is. So yeah, language is a wonderful thing to delve into and learn.
So read the language guides. If you took anything from this video, read the Banu and Xi'an language guides. They're extensive. I think the Banu language guide is like 40 pages, and the Xi'an is like 80 pages. It is.
Yeah,
it is
I was thinking that the Banu one is very short.
Yeah. But they're PDFs.
Depends if you include the dictionary at the end.
Yes.
So it's like 20 pages.
Yeah, they have a huge amount, but it's mostly just language stuff. But I would say maybe 3 to 10 pages of those is just culture, just pulling out cultural.
Yeah, like huge parts of it are just. There's actually 242 pages, including the dictionary
in the Xi'an.
For the Banu.
Oh, jeez.
About 150 if you take out just the language bits and just looking at the lore and stuff. So
yeah,
and the Banu one is a lot less of like a language guide and a lot more of a lore guide, actually, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you want to know those, there's some extensive stuff in that. And that, again, I guess the Xi'an is a little shorter because I remember it being like 100 pages for the Xi'an guide. But it was done earlier.
He'll confirm that for you. I know the tevarin guide is very short.
It doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist.
Yeah. I think that the Xi'an one is about 100 pages, but it's more generously typeset. Like the margins. So I think they probably have about the same number of words.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know from my stuff on the tevarin, but I've got 19 pages of snippets from where they're mentioned in the lore, or and that's going to the lore writer's guide and all the articles. So
do you want to know
down? So.
Do you want to know the one tevarin language thing I can tell you that might be interesting?
Go for it.
The Banu language guide tells us that tevarin don't call themselves tevarin; they call themselves something which sounds like tevarin, and that's all we know, really.
I imagine.
Well, we do.
I imagine that because they like seeds.
Right. That we do know. Apparently, we also know their one food. So we know a couple of things. We know Rajora is their religious text, but we also know their food from Star Watch.
Yeah.
Where they tell us about their seed ball that tastes like peanut butter with ketchup, which is the Kolever or something like that. Kolever.
Yeah.
So
I guess we also
how
know
you say that word on.
They live in mountains because their capital city was built on top of a mountain. So like they're very high altitude species. So we know a little bit, but
which really aids it when you think of it, they were not the prime species, and that Rajora kind of has them looking to the sky to watch for predators. It almost does say if they're living on the mountains in an eagle's eyrie type thing, that their predators are flying beasts.
Or they went to the mountains because they became the predators. It's literally their cultural way of saying, "I am the predator now." Like the.
Oh well, I suppose
I am above now. You can't look any bit higher because I am up higher. So
yes, we've got above you. So, but
yeah,
it's an interesting one to try and sort out.
So look forward to we're gonna wrap this up, and I'll say we'll look forward to question and answers where me and Al will sit there in jail and be like, what about the Banu? Let's go through the entire cultural history of the Banu for an hour and a half and have Jale rattle off what he can.
I'll try.
In fact, I'll just do this. Patreon supporters, put your questions into Patreon, and we will answer them in our next Law Citizen pod guide.
And if you are watching this on YouTube, make sure you put this. If you're watching this on Spotify, we won't listen to it because I don't read those comments at all. So look down below, go to the YouTube and then read in the comments and to explain that to us. Let us know those things. Give us questions for Banu. We'll start with Banu since they have
we won't answer. And if you put the questions into the YouTube, we won't answer them on the YouTube, but we will take them out. And we do read every comment that you put in. We don't always answer them, but we do read them.
Yes. And remember, subscribe to the channel. Go check out Jale's YouTube and Twitter and the Inforunners for more content, lore content. And like I say every time, remember, it's Historia at Astra.